Well, howdy folks. Welcome to Texas Cooking Today. What I have here is some wonderful information for you, so get ready to watch. Right now we're in the heart of Dallas. This is the park that my father actually proposed to my mother in. So I thought it would be fun to do a intro video right from here. Thank you very much for watching. Now let's get in the kitchen. Today I wanted to talk to you about how to develop recipes. This is a video I've been wanting to do for a long time, but I just haven't had the opportunity to get to it. And also, I wanted to pick the right recipe in order to teach this lesson. And so what I did is I chose the cinnamon buns recipe in order to teach a lesson on how to develop a recipe. And that is because I didn't take a cinnamon buns recipe that was already made. I developed my own. Now, before we get into how to develop a recipe, we need to talk about some of the requirements that you're going to have in order to make good recipes. In order to bring ingredients together in the right way, to combine them in a way that produces harmony and good flavors and balance, acidic balance, textures right, that kind of thing, you really have to first understand and know your ingredients. Part of knowing your ingredients is to know exactly what they taste like, what their texture is like. If I put a quarter of a teaspoon of flour in your mouth, a quarter a teaspoon of semolina in your mouth, and a quarter teaspoon of cornmeal in your mouth, you should be able to instantly distinguish each and every one of those, okay, by themselves. If I were to give you a piece of jicama, you should immediately know what that jicama tastes like. I can describe it to you right now. Jicama, it's very simple. It looks like a potato on the inside and on the outside. When you slice it, it is somewhat juicy. When you bite into its flesh, the first thing you'll notice is there is a slightly apple-like flavor to it. And it's somewhat juicy, but not as juicy as an apple. So it's sort of like eating a weak-flavored dry apple, in a manner of speaking. Jicama has a unique flavor that way, and it works with certain dishes. For instance, if I wanted to put jicama with arugula or with radicchio, it works really well with those, okay? But if I were to take jicama and, let's say, put nutmeg on it, that would be god-awful. Those two flavors won't work together, all right? So, it's about understanding your flavors, understanding what the flavor profile is like on each ingredient, understanding other properties of each ingredient. And the only way you can get that is through time and experimentation. So don't be afraid to fail in the kitchen. And that's the first kind of hard rule, is know your ingredients. Rule 2, don't be afraid to fail in the kitchen. And number 3, don't be afraid to experiment. It's through experimentation that we learn and grow, okay? And cooking is, some people say cooking's a science. Well, in a manner of speaking, yes, there is some science involved in cooking. Cooking is also an art form, and it is, of course, sustenance. It brings forth our sustenance, so it's very important. What I want to teach you today is how I structure a recipe, how I put one together. Okay, so this is what I have behind me are 15 separate ingredients. And I sat down last night and I had to put together some sort of recipe that was going to give me a cinnamon roll that was better than everybody else's cinnamon rolls, had a better texture to it, had better flavor to it, had a better appearance to it, the whole ball of wax I wanted to improve. Okay, so that's what I looked for. Now, when I do things like this, sometimes I will draw from recipes that I've used in the past. And that's what I did here. I decided that in order to make a good cinnamon roll, it's going to have certain things. Number one, it needs to have the right texture. Okay, so it needs to be light and fluffy, but at the same time, when you pull it apart, it needs to be stretchy and elastic. It shouldn't come apart like a cake. It should stretch and should require a little bit of something to pull it apart. And that changes the bite of the dough as well. How it feels when you chew it changes as a result of that elasticity. So I wanted that. I wanted a very rich tasting dough, all right? And I started thinking, what's the richest dough that I normally make that's a yeast bread? And I thought that would be my German white bread recipe. So I turned to my German white and I drew from it. Now I made a few changes on my German white bread. I increased the amount of sugar. I changed the amount of yeast, and I changed some of the rules on how it's risen. A German white bread is risen very, very, very slowly to produce an incredibly even crumb that is very unique. It's wonderful. But in this case, that wasn't so important. If it has large pores of air in the inside of it, that's okay, it can have that. I wanted a dough with a higher hydration rate because that allows it to rise up easier and faster and for it to be lighter on the inside. It's a good thing. So there's a lot of elements that went into this. So last night, I'm sitting there, I've got my notes here. I'm sitting there, I pulled my pen out, I'm making my notes. I'm thinking, okay, I want to use this German white, so I started with it, made my changes on it. Then I needed a filling. Now when I'm thinking of cinnamon rolls, I'm thinking, what kind of flavors can I pull from a cinnamon roll that is A, traditional, and B, going to really enhance it? Something that's going to lift it up a little bit and make it a little better than other people's cinnamon rolls that are just kind of plain Jane. So what I did, tweaked the dough a little bit, okay, make it a little better tasting. Got a lot of butter in it, it's got egg in it, all right, it's got milk in it. It's a very rich tasting dough, so it's good. And it's going to be sweet. The filling is going to be quite sweet. 2 different kinds of sugar, so I get a good flavor there, a rich flavor. A lot of butter, so a very buttery effect on these cinnamon rolls. The flavors, of course, it's cinnamon rolls. So the outstanding flavor, the crown prince of the dish, is the cinnamon. So in order to make a really good cinnamon roll, I have to have that up front, which means I want that as my primary flavor, I want a secondary flavor, and I want a background flavor. And I need flavors that work with each other. Now, I'm in Texas. In Texas, we like to use a lot of pecans. And it's not unusual to see pecans in a cinnamon roll. If I lived up northeast, then I might use maybe some dried cranberries. If I lived in California, I might use raisins. So it can be regional, draw from what you have around you. I'm going to be using pecans because we are rich in pecans here and it's one of our Texas flavors. Okay, now, so pecans and cinnamon work well together, but cinnamon will definitely overwhelm the flavor of the pecans. So the pecans become secondary as a secondary flavor. Now we need a background flavor that works with both of those other flavors, something that kind of pulls them all together and causes this whole thing to become something very, very special by itself. So my background flavor, what's going to float in there, and people are going to wonder how it's there, is going to be just a tiny bit of bourbon. That woody flavor of bourbon. No alcohol really to speak of. It's such a tiny amount we're using. And it's sitting out long enough for most of the alcohol to evaporate. If you wish to use a bourbon extract, you can do that. But remember, extracts are often laden with alcohol, so you're back to square one on that. Just use the real product, and if you're worried about it, cook the alcohol off before using it. It's just that simple. Now, I have my front flavor, secondary flavor, background flavor. Those are going to work well, but I have to use the right proportions. I can't go and throw a quarter or a half a cup of bourbon in this and expect it to work, because that would be nasty with those other flavors. It has to be a small amount. It has to be wispy and in the background. And it works well with those pecans and with the cinnamon. So it's knowing those ingredients. Very important, guys. And knowing what the ingredients are going to do when you combine them. So that is what I do when developing a recipe. Now in this case I chose a baked recipe because I wanted to show you that there's a lot of elements involved. I told you I wanted an elastic dough and I wanted to have a certain bite to it. I want it to rise up the right way. Okay, well this has a lot of sugar in it because number one, I wanted the dough itself to be sweeter than the normal German white bread. German white bread has a couple of teaspoons of sugar in it to slowly rise it and give it that even crumb. I'm not doing that here. We're throwing in 1/4 of a cup in this recipe, in the dough itself, and adding extra yeast. So we're going to get a really energetic effect when it goes to, or comes to rising this dough. And that's exactly what I want. I'll rise it once in a bowl, and then I'll make my cinnamon rolls. I'll rise them again, and then go to baking. So a lot of elements. Now, again, the elasticity of the dough. How do I increase that? Well, if I look at this recipe and I examine the history on it, I learned that the recipe was invented in sometime in the 1920s. Most people attribute it to Sweden, and I agree that's probably where it started. Quickly spread through Europe. It hit Germany and Austria and England, and each nation, of course, gave it a new title, a new name. And so this was a really neat and very delicious dish. At that time, flour was a little different than what flour is now. Back then, flour was a high gluten wheat flour, and it was used mostly for breads, and all-purpose flour wasn't around, okay? So there wasn't this all-purpose alternative. It wasn't until later on that they got better at milling flour and controlling gluten content and things like that, that they came out with all-purpose flour and cake flour and things like that, that gave the flour a very special property to it. So I wanted to develop a cinnamon roll that was more like what would have been made back then. So there would have been a high gluten flour used. And that's what I used in this. I used bread flour. That way, I get the extra gluten, I get the extra sticky quality of that gluten, and that sticky quality adds to the elasticity of the dough. Again, knowing my ingredients allows me to optimize my dough so that my cinnamon rolls come out exactly right. This is all part of recipe development, guys. The original German white bread recipe used water and milk. I'm not using water and milk, I'm just going with milk, okay, plain and simple. That's my liquid for the dough. And some eggs and some butter. The dough's going to be decadent. That's it. Recipe development. I had to look at how I wanted the swirl on the inside to be. How much cinnamon should there be? How much sugar? What would be an even amount for the amount of dough I'm making? I had to approach it from that angle. I don't want it to be too sweet so it's cloying, but I don't want it to not be sweet enough and boring. You know what I mean? It needs to make a nice cinnamony, sugary kind of swirl. Well, the swirl, of course, but more like a paste on the inside when it's cooked up. So the ingredients had to be in the right proportion, which means a lot of butter and enough sugar to pull it off. Flavors in that sugar, again, I wanted richness, so I mixed 2 different kinds of sugar. Get some brown sugar in there. It pulls in a lot of that maple flavor, and it's really, really cool. It makes for a good taste. Recipe development means that sometimes you're willing to fail. But guess what, guys? This recipe, which I've never made before, that I developed last night, sitting back while I was relaxing and thinking about what I wanted to do on this recipe, that's it's going to work out fine. And that's only because I've been doing this that long. But I had to fail a lot to get where I could do it like that. So on my, if you watch the show for cinnamon rolls, you're going to see how I used this recipe development technique and method to produce a beautiful, tasty, scrumptious cinnamon roll. Recipe development means you know your ingredients and you understand their properties. So guys, spend a lot of time tasting everything you cook with. Know what everything tastes like raw and cooked, and how those ingredients work with each other. When you learn that, you're going to be making some fantastic recipes. When it comes to recipe development, not only do you have to have a strong sense of flavor and what all these different ingredients taste like, and how they react with each other, and their acid levels, and a lot of things like that, but you need to have a strong understanding of the tools of the kitchen, the tools of the trade. Everything from a knife and a cutting board to more intricate processing equipment, such as this device, which is commonly used for milling and processing spices and things like that. There's a larger one that's made of volcanic stone that's commonly used in Mexico, and that would be called a molcajete. And the molcajete is what sauces for tamales are processed in. Now, how does that equate to this? Well, let me explain. A long time ago, when tamales were made, they would take chilies that were dried, boil them, and then process those chilies in a molcajete to make a sauce for the tamales to flavor the masa and the meat in the tamales. Now, where that becomes important here is that later on, people discovered the blender. And next thing you know, they're using that wonderful device to make their chili sauce. But with that innovation came a slight bitterness to the sauce. And a lot of people attribute that bitterness to the mechanical processing of the chili. Well, that's not it at all. What's really happening there is little tiny fragments of the skin get into your chili sauce. And that's because even when you strain it through a strainer, you're still getting some fine particles of that skin, and that's the bittering quality right there. So what did I do? I decided when I made my tamale videos to teach a different method than that, to remove the skin completely from the equation, to clean up what the process was to produce a very clean chili paste that then your sauce is made from, making a much better tasting tamale. And that's what I did. In my video on tamale making, you will see this guy used. And this is your typical food mill, all right? That's all this is. It's just a paddle that pushes food through a sieve. But the advantage there is you do not get any skins in that chili paste. So those tamales come out so much more pure in their flavor. Well, now understand something. Had it not been for my knowledge of a food mill and how to use it properly, I would not have been able to have taught that technique or to have included it in my recipe. So you have to have a strong understanding of all of your implements in the kitchen, what's available to you, how to use it, and how to extract something better from what you're using. Also, there's the process of growth. It should never end. You should always be learning more about cooking if it's cooking you're interested in doing. Guys, having strong familiarity with everything and what it does is going to help you produce better quality recipes. If you know your tools, then you can apply those tools to your methods and grow your methods and make better quality products from all of that. That's the whole idea. A recipe is a product like anything else, and it produces other products, and it's very important. It is the pathway or the instructions, as it were, to producing good food. And in order to provide that kind of structure, you need knowledge of what's available. So again, get involved in what's there, get those items, experiment with them, so you can learn in the future how to apply that in producing better quality whatever you're making. All right? So if you wanted to make, let's say, a plum sauce, food mill's the perfect thing. It takes the struggle out of it, gives you a clean sauce to work with. Guys, this is what it's about. When it comes to working with recipes, you need knowledge, how those ingredients work. A strawberry and a blueberry mixed together in your mouth are going to produce a certain specific flavor, and you should be able to know or discern what that flavor should be like, or might be like, or would be like before you've actually combined them, so that when you do and you chew those together, you are like, okay, yeah, this is tasting exactly what I thought it would taste like. And that just comes from familiarity. Familiarity means getting in there and being willing to try and fail, okay? If you're not willing to fail, then you're not growing. If you're just going through the process of making recipes that you've made before, but not really trying anything new, then you're not growing in your ability to produce recipes. So it is the willingness to fail that gives you the ability to grow so that you can produce that better recipe. Give that a try. So here, this is the best advice I have for recipe development. From there, read lots of cookbooks, get lots of ideas of how other people do their things, and from their methodology and from their techniques, learn and grow and develop your techniques. I wanted to give another example of kitchen equipment and how it's used in the development of recipes, and why understanding technique matters in the recipe development process. You have to understand all sides of the coin, okay? You don't have to have a mixer to mix dough. You can do it by hand. But if you don't want to spend a lot of time kneading, which is what the mixer does for you, there are other ways. So if I want to teach making bread, I need to also teach that person that I have shown how to mix something together in a mixer. I need to teach them that you don't have to have that mixer. You can do a technique called autolyzing. If you don't know what autolyzing is, well, that's where you basically develop your gluten for your bread before you start rising it with your yeast. It's a little different technique, but it works, and it's the technique that bakers used for centuries before the mixer was ever built, okay? They didn't sit there and knead every loaf like it was a huge amount of manual labor. No, they autolyzed, all right? Older technique. So you need to understand that in order to produce that better quality recipe. That's all a part of it. So it's about the equipment. It's about the techniques that utilize that equipment. It's about the taste of the food. It's about the qualities of what those foods do when they are combined with each other. It's about what acids and bases do with each other. There's some chemistry involved, some science. There is artistry involved in a great deal, because you have to balance food on the palate so that it has a beautiful flavor. You have to balance your foods in such a way that they're attractive to people from the eye, because if your food is ugly, well, we eat with our eyes first, so it has to have the right appearance. That starts with knowledge of technique, and that comes from repetition. There you have it. Thank you for watching Texas Cooking Today. If you would, please click that subscribe button. If you would, please click the like button. Drop a comment below. If you have some questions or anything like that, please ask those questions. I'm here to help out, and that's the reason I do these videos, is to teach cooking, not so much just to give out recipes. Once you've learned cooking, you can develop your own recipes, and that's sort of my goal, is to get people there. Folks, thank you very much again, and if you would, please have a good day. Bye-bye. I would like to say thank you very much for watching Texas Cooking Today. If you would, please take a look at my channel. Also, please click like. If you have any comments or questions, or if you have a request, just put them down there in the comments and I will get to it. Thank you very much for watching, and folks, you have a good day. Bye-bye.